2. There's 2 sequels to Annie. The first one was called Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge, which sounds so fake. Well, Elton John's brand new musical Tammy Faye opened to overall terrible reviews and low interest from the public, prompting them to announce almost immediately that the show would be closing on December 8th, less than a month after they opened, and after only 24 previews and 29 performances. What is up, chicken butts? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about some of the biggest Broadway belly flops of all time. That's right, Elton John's new big expensive Broadway show stumbled and died very quickly.
Miss Keisha. Oh my fucking god, she fucking dead.
And in honor of both that and Wicked becoming the biggest Broadway adaptation ever to open in the movies. The fuck? And in honor of Wicked having the biggest opening weekend ever for a Broadway adaptation, we're going to go through some of Broadway's biggest belly flops. So grab your program, remember not to sing during the show, and let's get started. Back to Tammy Faye. The New York Post called it a disaster of biblical proportions, and they're not wrong. The musical cost $25 million, and last week it was the lowest grossing show on Broadway. Up against small shows, plays, you name it, this was the bottom of the Broadway barrel. Looking at the percentages for ticket sales, this poor cast was performing to almost a half-empty theater. When they've just opened, this is supposed to be when they have more momentum than ever. So it's pretty clear why the producers called it quits quite quickly. And you really know it's bad when you can't even fill a theater with comped tickets. I think I got some wig in my mouth, and it is sponsored by Batman.
I'm Batman.
Not that one, the one with the nipples. Yes, thank you. The cast of Tammy Faye is led by Katie Braben. Just assume I'm going to get most names incorrectly. But Miss Braben is in her Broadway debut after she won an Olivier Award for her performance as Tammy Faye in this role when it was open across the pond, when it was open and playing in London. She is joined by Christian Borle as the protagonist's husband, and he was actually a last-minute replacement for the Book of Mormon's Andrew Rannells, who played the role in London and I think had really solid reviews. And he was originally announced by the producers to be performing with the show in New York. But he left the project when they couldn't reach a deal. And he said something along the lines of, like, I don't know why they would announce me before I've signed a contract or something.
Unfortunately, we just got into a situation where we couldn't quite find terms that made everyone happy.
Yeah.
Which was really disappointing. And I guess why normally they don't announce an actor before they do contract. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a professional, but I thought that was odd.
Which happens literally all the time. Producers have a conversation with someone, and then that's leaked to the press. Oh, Sydney Sweeney's in talks for, Bananas in Pajamas, the movie. But yes, producers, it's like, even if so-and-so doesn't end up signing the contract, you want that buzz, you want that energy. And those producers were probably like being cracked down on to announce who's going to be in the show. So they knew it would be better to just like go with the assumption that he would buckle down, or give in, there we go, and accept whatever clearly lowball offer they were making for him. And he bounced. You got to respect that, because there are many, many professions that are underpaid, but people would be shocked to know how little a Broadway actor can actually make. In fact, Anthony Ramos, I think on a podcast or something, he was having a conversation and he basically said, like, even when he was in Hamilton on Broadway, he was bringing home like maybe $1,000 a week. And to some people, you might be like, oh my God, who can complain about that? Have you seen the rent prices in New York? And have you seen anything else about Everything. So one of the most common complaints in the recent round of reviews from the Broadway opening seems to be that Christian Borle seems borreled. By that I mean bored. That did not quite work. But he seems really bored. Like he just doesn't bring anything to it. He doesn't seem like he really wants to be there. And so the production overall is just less exciting. There's way less energy than when it was previously staged in London. And Tammy Faye is not the only time we're going to talk about Sir Elton John today. I don't know, maybe you've already talked about him today. Lestat.
I have lived many lifetimes. I have hidden in the shadows and suffered in the light. I have loved, I have killed, and now I will finally tell my story to the world.
The Mind of Anne Rice, the music of Elton John and Bertie Taupin. The theatrical event of the year, Lestat, coming to Broadway.
Die young, live forever.
2006's Lestat on Broadway. Tammy Faye, of course, was not Elton John's first bitter taste of Broadway failure. Back in 2006, he worked on the musical adaptation inspired by Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles, which is known as the series that has Interview with a Vampire, and I think it's like a multi-show universe. Reviews of this Broadway production were uniformly negative. They were just terrible. The New York Post's verdict was bloody awful. The New York Times wrote, Lestat, the musical sleeping pill, dare to look upon this show and keep your eyelids from growing heavier and heavier and heavier. But this production only lasted a little bit longer than Tammy Faye. It opened on March 25th, 2006, and it closed on May 2008. And it closed on May 28th, 2006, after 33 previews and 39 performances. The Washington Post critic Peter Marks opined that a gay vampire with a 2-octave range can be just as dull as a straight one. Was that homophobia? I can't tell. Put it in the comments if it is. Don't put homophobia in the comments. But you know what I meant. Drat, the cat. I look like I'm fucking speaking at the Republican National Convention. Drat the cat. That's right, folks. 2 exclamation points. So this show was about a Gilded Age cat girl, who becomes a jewel thief before stealing the heart of the police officer who was previously chasing her, trying to arrest her. And it lasted only 8 days on Broadway. Ira Levin had originally intended to call the show Cat and Mouse until the Nobel Prize-winning author Gunter Grass, that's what I look like right now, Gunther Grass. The Nobel Prize-winning author Gunter Grass published a book of the same name. Levin apparently always hated the title, Drat the Cat, saying, I didn't like it then, and I don't like it now. More advice for young playwrights, never use 2 exclamation points in a title. 1 you can get away with, 2, no. I don't know why I said most of that like it was a Real Housewives catchphrase. Advice for young playwrights, never use too many. I didn't like it then, and I don't like it now. Advice for young playwrights, never use 2 exclamation points in a title. 1955's Pipe Dream, and yes, I am naked underneath this. It was brought to the people of the past, from the musical writing team Rodgers and Hammerstein, but they created a string of indelible classics. That sounds like something I would say, right? They include Oklahoma, with the exclamation point, Carousel, South Pacific, The King and I, and Pipe Dream. But that one, Pipe Dream, based on John Steinbeck's novel, Sweet Thursday, turned into financial disaster. Despite the record advanced ticket sales when it opened in November of 1955, everyone just freaking hated it. So between the terrible reviews and the terrible word of mouth, the show closed in June of 1956.
One of America's favorite underdogs has turned into a Broadway surprise. Rocky the Musical
debuted to positive reviews in Hamburg before it transferred to Broadway in 2014. And no expense was spared, as that old man said in Jurassic Park.
Really spectacular. Spared no expense. Spared no expense. Spared no expense. Spared no expense. Spared no expense.
The production ran up $20 million in its costs, including $4.3 million just for the elaborate stage. And it was a pretty amazing setup. It was literally a full-sized boxing ring that like came out of the wall. So I guess for most of the production, it was somewhat bare bones. But then once it was time for the big event, the stadium like came out of the walls and shit flipped or something. Once this full-sized boxing ring took over the stage, it disrupted the first few rows of the audience. So literally the first few rows were moved by ushers to bleachers on the set for the last 20 minutes of the show, because I can't imagine anything a bunch of old rich people would enjoy more than not only having to move, but they have to move in front of everybody and they have to go on stage and sit on an uncomfortable ass bleacher. Like, I wonder why this didn't click with the general public. So the staging did end up winning a Tony Award, but in the end, sluggish sales delivered a knockout blow to Rocky. After just 28 previews and 188 performances, so probably the biggest hit we have on our hands so far. Shall we? Jumping back to the future to Bring Back Birdie, which was the sequel to the 1960 musical Bye Bye Birdie. Triple B's, they loved their Triple B shows. Do I look like Kurt Cobain? Bring Back Birdie was the sequel to the 1960 musical.
Bye bye birdie, I'm gonna miss you so. Bye bye birdie, why did you have to go?
Which was a huge freaking success. It won several Tony Awards and had a really, I think it's a fun movie version. It's one of the like classic movie musicals, and Margaret is in it. And I had a big crush on Bye Bye Birdie and Margaret when I was little. And then I found out she was in the Santa Claus movies.
You was
Your
I mean
father.
I did
Isn't she like Mrs. Claus's mom or something?
We don't know what's happening at the North Pole. We're completely mystified by it.
we think that
We think we're in Canada.
we don't know that he's the big man. The big man.
But it's pretty fun. There's an iconic number, especially for that one called the Telephone Hour. I don't know if you were inserting a clip, but I'm holding just in case.
Well, I heard they got pinned. Yeah. I was hoping they would. Gonna live it at last. He's gone. Going steady for good. Going steady. Going steady. Going steady. Steady for. Going steady. Yeah.
Like, if you didn't see Bye Bye Birdie 20 years ago, I guess go find a local production or maybe a tour. And that actually reminds me of two other flops. They're kind of like they're the B cast of this video because they never made it to Broadway. There's two sequels to Annie, not counting there's at least one sequel to the movie. The first one was called Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge, which sounds so fake, but it really did happen. It came together 6 years after the original production closed, and it starred Oscar winner J.K. Simmons, who I just mentioned in my other video for the red one. No comes full circle. But yes, it starred J.K. Simmons, not as Annie, obviously. But it opened in November 1989 at the Kennedy Center. And the plot, are you ready for this? Sees Daddy Warbucks discover that in order to officially adopt Annie, he must find a wife, which there's just so many problems with that plot line, like implying that not only any man can't, take care of a young child, but also not even that young of a child. But this rich man, like this dude could have a staff member for anything he possibly needs assistance with. She's come from like this horribly abusive, overfilled children's home with this drunk. To kill her or something, and at least in the movie version, like they chased her up the super high railroad tracks. That scared the shit out of me as a kid. It's just wild that rich ass Daddy Warbucks is not allowed to raise Annie, but so he has to find a wife, which is also a plot line of the Santa Claus 2 movie. Santa's back. What would a super freaking rich bachelor do other than hold a nationwide contest to find a new wife? So he teams up with Annie and Mrs. Christmas. That's the character name, Mrs. Christmas, who is the head of the United Mothers of America, Uma. And I wish it was played by Uma Thurman. I don't know how old she was at the time. We'll put it in the comments if you know how old Uma Thurman was when Annie 2 Miss Hannigan's Revenge came out. But so he teams up with Mrs. Christmas and Annie to decide on the women who enter this contest. And I really wish it could be like a Tila Tequila style situation where he meets like men and women. But Tila Tequila hadn't been invented yet, which probably would have been best if she never was.
I don't feel so good.
Mrs. Hannigan's been in prison since the first Annie, and she escapes prison because she hears about this contest. Like, girl, move on. But she hears about this contest and she busts out of prison Shawshank style and disguises herself as Charlotte O'Hara and sneaks in and applies for the contest. And so she kidnaps this young girl who looks like Annie, which, like, I have not seen that many girls with that haircut in my day, but maybe it was different a couple years back. But she literally kidnaps this girl and then, like, somehow kidnaps the real Annie and switches them. But I don't know how that benefits her at all. But anyway, there's like a whole climax. They chase each other around, and I guess there was wrestling. Probably not like in a ring like Rocky. I know Rocky was boxing. Yeah, I'm talking about the ring. Why do they call it a ring when it's a square? I've never put a square ring on my finger. I've never put a ring on my finger at all. Throughout the 3-month run of Annie 2 at the Kennedy Center, every single page of the 145-page script, which that is a long, long script for like a family show, but every single page was changed. Most of the songs were either like cut or cut down, given to different characters, or just like fully replaced. Millions of dollars were lost in the advertising alone.
At no expense.
Because of course they thought they had a surefire hit on their hands. It's Annie 2. Duh.
I mean, I'm not a professional, but I thought that was odd.
And after 36 performances, the show canceled its plan to open in New York. But the investors said, we can't just give up. So they retooled and they hired a new team and they decided to take another swing at it. And Annie Warbucks was born. I guess Daddy Warbucks marries Annie like as a child bride. So no, she just takes his name. He adopts her regular style as a daughter. Annie Warbucks opened off Broadway 4 years after Annie 2 Miss Hannigan's Revenge. They had to let it distance itself a little bit, get that bad taste out of everybody's mouth. You know, it was like I don't know, what's like a failed fast food? Coke. It was like new Coke. What? Annie Warbucks had a tryout run in Chicago, and then it took a small tour of like 4 or 5 other cities. Then it had its plan to move to Broadway after an off-Broadway run, but due to a mistake, I don't know who was in charge of this, but the Tony rules apparently dictated that a production to be considered a transfer on Broadway for that season's Tony Awards, it has to open within 30 weeks of its original off-Broadway opening. And by the time they learned this, they were like, oh shit, we can't do that. So the main investor then pulled out, and poor little Annie was sent back to the orphanage, bitch. But you know what? The sun will come out tomorrow. But that's not guaranteed, though. Like, it might be cloudy. Kelly. Via Galactica. It's time for Scary Carrie. Shitty Bang Bang. Oh, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark from 2011. If you liked this, or, have anything else nice and positive to say, throw that shit in the comments. And don't forget to share and subscribe and make me any suggestions or baked goods that you want. Bye.